My name is Edward Hartwig. I spent a long time working with entrepreneurs, and as of last summer, I've started out on my own. And maybe it's fitting that I'm here to replace somebody who's telling a story about fear and failure, because having not prepared, we may get a live demonstration. What am I going to talk about? I didn't know what I was going to talk about until about 5 minutes ago. And I think what I'll talk about is what I really do for a living at its heart, which is storytelling. My job is to create interest. And I think that is an incredibly valuable skill for entrepreneurs throughout the world. And I think it's a little bit different for entrepreneurs than it is for sort of traditional storytellers like myself. So all great stories are the same story. There's some person, that person has a problem, and they fail. And then they overcome that problem with a creative solution, and then they grow. And through their own personal growth, society is better. You can apply that model to almost every story, but it's the perfect story for entrepreneurs, because this is where we all start. We all start with some sort of dissatisfaction. We weren't born entrepreneurs. We went to the same schools as non-entrepreneurs. We attended the same classes, we met the same people, but somewhere along the line, we got frustrated, or we failed at something, and we decided that instead of just giving into that, we would overcome it. And so if you're going to tell a story as an entrepreneur, tell your own story. But there are a couple of tricks on how to do this, I think. And feel free to chime in, by the way, for those of you that want to, because I don't think that I'm the perfect person to tell this story. But I will say this, there are a number of stories that you're going to tell as an entrepreneur. Some of them are as short as answering the phone. When people call you or your service, how do you answer the phone? Some of them are the long history that you'll put on your website. This is where we started, this changed, right? And there's every story you can imagine in between. The elevator pitch is a 3-sentence story. This is who I am, this is what I do, and this is why I'm interesting to you, right? Anything more than that, and that person doesn't get the chance to ask you questions. The pitch in a boardroom is different, but it needs to be told in a specific way. So it's really, your story is going to be different. I'm not going to tell you a story, I'm just going to talk about stories in general. So your story, you can kind of fill in the blanks. The question is, how much of your story do you tell? How do you tell it? And when do you stop? So this is my advice, and I'm going to focus on the pitch, the sort of 2 to 3 minute pitch, preferably without 18 million slides or your entire business model in front of you. Just off the cuff, you should be able to tell this story any day, any time, to any person, anywhere, for any reason. In fact, you should be telling it to people that don't want to hear your story, because God forbid they hear your story and are interested, right? And whether you're answering the phone or you're telling the long history, there should be consistency throughout. And this 2 to 3 minute pitch is the essence of where your story lies. First tip, don't start at the beginning, right? The beginning of our story is normally not the most interesting part. To look at any great novel, it doesn't start at the beginning. It starts in the middle of some kind of action, right? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Why? That question isn't answered immediately. That's the point. Start in the middle of the action. I got a call last night at 11 o'clock asking me to be here today. I don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know if I'm going to succeed. That's far more interesting than me saying, like, I met these guys back 2 years ago, and then we kind of got together a little bit more often, we had lunch, right? Tell the story that matters. Start it in the middle, right? So always try to start in the middle of the action. That'll keep people interested, grabs their attention. Second thing, focus on your strength. And this is harder than most people think, right? Because not everybody knows the strength behind what they do. You know, I was going to give a couple of corporate examples, but I think Vashbota is a great example, right? You're not a laundry company, you're a logistics company. It's hard for some people to realize that. Coca-Cola is not a beverage company, it's a logistics company. I've lived on 3 continents, and I've lived in some very random places in the middle of nowhere, and you can always get Coke, right? You can tell how developed a country is not whether it has Coke or no Coke, because all countries have Coke. It's whether they have Coke Light, right? Has Coke invested enough to deliver Coke Light to the middle of nowhere? That's when you know you've made it. So Another great example is Zappos. Everybody knows Zappos, the shoe company? They're not a shoe company, they're a customer service company, right? They happen to sell shoes, but what they sell you is the customer service. It's the feeling that you get when you call up in the middle of the night, and as their CEO says, he used to test them by calling them in the middle of the night and asking them directions to the nearest pizza store, and seeing whether the customer service representative would put up with that and deal with it well, right? Because that's the level of customer service they wanted. They built a relationship first, they sold shoes second. Right? So knowing what kind of business you're in is really, really important because that's the story you want to tell, right? That's how you're different than everybody else. And I'm running out of my 5 minutes, so I'll fast forward. Don't pretend to be perfect, right? You excel at certain things, but everybody fails. That's the interesting, humanizing part of who you are. Remember that hero story. Regular guy fails, overcomes failure, is a better person, society benefits, right? That's part of your story, and it should be in there, right? So start in the middle. Get people hooked. Talk about what you're good at, right? Why you succeed where other people don't. Talk about why you became that person. What went wrong that drove you to this point? And finally, and maybe I should say this is my last point, but I'm going to give you some tips afterwards. Don't talk too much. Your job is not to answer everybody's questions. In fact, your job is to start people asking questions. You don't know what this investor wants. You don't know what this marketing person wants. They have ideas also, and you need to be open to those. So stop your story as soon as possible and wait for the questions. The more questions you get, the more you'll know you're doing the right thing. Okay? That's a 2 to 3 minute pitch right there. Apply your own topics or your own issues to that, and I think that you'll do great. 3 quick tips, and I'm going to get kicked off the stage, which I'll just let you know. There are some sort of counterintuitive parts of this. One, start telling, like you have a community that you've built around you. Those are the people that support you, whether they're your first customers or your mother and your father or your best friends. Tell them your story, right? Because sometimes what you think is interesting about you really isn't, right? And it's those people that are closest to you that can look you in the eye and say, drop that part, right? So I write a lot of stories, and I always have my wife read them first, because she is by far the most critical person of me on this planet and has no need to hold back, and it's incredibly useful. Drop this, whole sections that I think are great. Absolutely wiped out, obliterated, but it's always better for it in the end. Right? Tip 2 is never lie about the things that are important. Don't lie about money, don't lie about failure, but lie a little bit about the things that aren't. Sometimes when we try to tell a true story, one that really, really is important to us, we make a mistake. And then because we're telling this deeply personal, true story, we feel the need to go back and correct the mistake. I was on the TED stage a year ago, and I got the age of my daughter wrong while telling a story about my daughter, right? This is an embarrassing moment for me personally, but nobody in the room cares how old my daughter is. The only point is that she is. And so by letting that go, by letting go of that truth, I'm able to tell a more fluid story and not lose the audience, right? And I can always go, if somebody asks me about it later, I can always correct it. But in the moment, the story needs to flow from start to finish. Right? So unless you've made a critical mistake about something that you absolutely cannot lie about, let it go. And my last tip, and then I'll step down, is signposts. Everybody likes a story that doesn't, to be honest, everybody likes a story that doesn't involve PowerPoint. It's interesting to hear somebody talk. It brings the focus to you. If you use slides, it puts the focus someplace else. The fear for many speakers is that we'll lose your own story, right? You'll lose the opportunity to say all the things you want to say. Set signposts. When you're coming up with your talk, pick the 5 to 10 things that are the most important that you get to, and then move from one to the other. Don't worry about what happens in between. I haven't planned this talk. And when I got here today, all I did is I wrote down, talk about this, and then end, right? So I had 5 parts of this. I had the parts of the story, the 5 parts of the story, and then the 3 tips. Once you get to those signposts, it's okay. It doesn't matter how you got there as long as you got there. Okay. That's it. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you very much. I hope that's useful. Again, great event. Thanks for inviting me.
I knew Eddie can do that, so like you said, at 11 o'clock I asked him. So I normally don't do that because people don't answer after 9 o'clock. But it's a pleasure to listen to you. So that's why I give you more than 5 minutes. Yeah?